Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, today I'm honored to have on this episode of Risk Reward, where we get to interview entrepreneurs, business leaders, and owners, and talk about what makes them successful and what how to succeed in today's ever-changing world. So, I have with me today a gentleman that he has been in the EMS space for many years. He is currently owner of Marsh EMS Consulting along with his wife. And it is a family run operation. And we're going to get to talk to him about his what's going on, his business, and a little bit. We're going to dive deep into EMS. So without further ado, Mr. Michael Marsh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Awesome. No, thank you for your willingness and participation. So, tell us a little bit about Marsh EMS Consulting. How did that
Well,
come about?
well, if I'm being honest with you, I never thought that I would ever be a consultant. I thought consultants were a waste of my time when when I'm trying to figure out problems, which is a fun story for later. But I was a paramedic. I worked all the way from the field as a paramedic EMT all the way up to director of operations and special operations. And so over 26, 27 years, I had spent predominantly in the state of California, in Northern California, in the Bay Area, serving communities like San Francisco, San Mateo, Alameda County, which houses Oakland. So some really diverse background and socioeconomic, areas where I cut my teeth learning how to go from the ground and providing patient care to managing and administrating all those programs. But after COVID had calmed down in Texas, I had had all the fun that I could have in my career field and retired out and thought I would go do something else. And after about 2 weeks of sitting at home, my wife became increasingly annoyed with me being home all the time. Uh, and and so, coming from a background of always either being deployed to disasters or trainings and on the field a lot, being home for long periods of time was interesting for our newfound relationship. But she then said, "You should go teach, and you should go do what you've been doing, but do it as a contractor, as a consultant." And of course, the very first thing that came out of my mouth was, "There's no one in the world that is going to pay to listen to me talk. Like, no one at all. In fact, consultants are a waste of time and they're full of hot air and all that kind of stuff." But I am here to say that 4 years later, I have spent zero on marketing and advertisement. And I am gainfully employed with several really awesome contracts and partnerships and people that I've learned and listened to along the way. And I think the reason why I feel that my niche market in what I do is so successful is because I immerse myself into the heads of the people and the problems and listen and am able to look at different ways of solving problems. And so I'm not there for the sales, I'm there for the problem solving, and that's always the joy of what I do. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome, awesome. Well, tell us, a little bit more, like who do you primarily serve?
So if you were to break me down into books of business, my primary book of business or skill set, love language, whatever you want to call it, is I do a great deal of training and full functional exercise, scenario based training in response to mass casualty incidents or active shooter incidents for EMS responders that have to integrate into fire and law enforcement environments and how to bridge those gaps, how to utilize current existing incident command systems that are out there, thought processes, kind of deconflicting the the world that comes crashing together very quickly in these no notice, high stake, incidents that occur that unfortunately are occurring way too often in comparison to when I first started. I mean, if you told me 30 years ago I would end my career wearing body armor in an armored vehicle and serving a SWAT team armed with a handgun, I would have told you you're absolutely crazy, and that is how I ended my career. So it's been a ride. So that's always been my being able to kind of be the Rosetta Stone of first responders and put them together and help build successful outcomes to these low frequency, high stress, high casualty events. So that's my first primary book of business. Um, from going around and teaching that, my second book of business is analyzing and looking at business operational flows, right? So, for those that don't really understand EMS or emergency medical services and first response, there are really three points of this triangle that live in the world, and it's the fire department, the law enforcement, and then emergency medical services. And sometimes emergency medical services is combined with the fire service, but predominantly in the nation, they're a third service, third tip of the triangle. And everyone speaks their own language, right? And staffing crises, and you make more money doing TikTok channels now than you do doing a trade, right? So there's a lot of staffing issues. So we're asking our men and women to do a lot more with a lot less. And so having, I'll look at operational flow. So the reason I give you that background is because if you don't focus on certain areas and you're just administrating the policies and procedures or programs, you miss the ability to be successful in some of these high low frequency, high casualty incidents, right? And when you look at how you merge these disciplines together, that opens up the door to say, well, if we're not doing that well, what else are we not doing well? So I started getting into coming into people's businesses, um, which pause for a second on that. It's a trust, right? You are an outsider coming into someone's business, and they are asking you to tell you what's wrong. It's a very sensitive fine line, right?
Is that the so in that triangle, are you talking about you're going into, like, let's say, for example, like an ambulance company or
Sure. I
yeah, okay.
I have several. So I have done work for law enforcement, fire departments, and ambulance services. All three of them. Actually, I have successfully. And I'm now on my last contract that I'm finishing up right now is with a fire department in Colorado. That is relaunching their advanced life support system because they missed the mark doing it correctly the first time. So we ended up having to kind of shut it down and restart it a little bit. And so working with the state and working with the feds and other people like that are involved in regulatory compliance on things, was able to kind of go in there and reshape that by utilizing the department personnel to do that. So yeah, so bringing in, the fire service and the law enforcement are pretty traditional. They do not let people from the outside in. And they've got a lot of pride and a lot of tradition and a lot of subject matter experts that are within those services. So I'm very honored to be called into some of these departments to say, hey, help us fix this problem, right? Those I see that happening a lot with a lot of progressive chiefs, fire chiefs and police chiefs that are like, I'm not going to not hire someone from the outside because I've got the pride of my own department. Like, I'm going to get out of my own
Mm,
way, and you're going to tell me how we're going to fix this, and then we'll fix it, right? So,
mm.
uh, so I get to utilize 30 years of my experience, growing up from the ground all the way up to directors of operation, to to levy what I've learned and where I have fallen on my face to help them from doing the same. So
Hmm.
that's kind of my second book of business, and then of course my third is I do I have been asked to be a court appointed expert witness on on certain cases involving paramedics and EMTs for my opinions, and then I'll be asked to speak about some of my experiences as in the career that I've been a part of. I've been a part of several large career calls, and I'm asked often to go and speak at those at conferences.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, no, that's I see that on your, quite extensive resume. You've got a lot of you've got operations manager experience at American Medical Response. I've heard of them. They're very big. I
Yes,
think they're one of the biggest
they are.
private. Well, I'm not even sure if they're private or public or really what the structure of their business is, but I've heard of them. They're very well known within the EMS world. So you worked your way up the ranks up all the way up to operations manager there at in Arlington, Texas.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, I could see how your experience there in that particular niche can really help a lot of folks in the industry.
Yeah, and AMR, American Medical Response, is one of many companies that I've done time with. They're a national based air and ground EMS provider, and they do some nurse navigation issues and some technology leverages that are out there. They're a really awesome company. They're great people there that run that ship, and I've always had great success with American Medical Response. But they're a private, for-profit company, and sometimes, merging private for-profit within a traditional preventative planning, tax-based, fire department where that pays tax dollars for their services is sometimes hard to smush together, right? And so they got some pretty amazing leaders over there as well too.
Tell us a little bit about that. I find that interesting because you're right. It is a lot of these companies now we're focusing on the EMS side of that triangle that you were tip of that triangle that you were referring to earlier, because I feel like fire department and police are all, you know government entities. Like, I don't think there's any private organizations that or companies that provide those services. Ambulance is different because there are a lot of private entities, a lot of for-profit companies that provide that service. Tell us a little bit more about that. What's the business of ambulance? How do these guys function? If from your experience, can you give us some insight into that?
Yeah, so there are models that are out there for private-based fire departments that are out there. I know that one of them was rural metro, and as far as law enforcement, there's no privatized law enforcement because there's laws around all that stuff. But for EMS, there is a great deal of ambulance providers that are EMS. The ambulance really, way back in the day in the 70s, really started as a mortuary, transport. So they would take the corpses and stuff like that and move them from funeral homes to burial sites and so on. And that's truly how the traditional ambulance started. Back in the war, the medics out there and stuff like that would mash 407 sevens and all that kind of stuff that were on television. That you use ambulances to sustain patient care until they got to a hospital and whatnot. Over the years, that service has really professionalized, if that's a word, or become really legitimate business owners that like American Medical Response or Acadian Ambulance, Empress out of New York, or places like that. There are ambulance services that the way they structure it is that they bring a cost-effective delivery mode of emergency medical services to an area that may not be operating an ambulance service and or are operating ambulance services within the fire service that are not um, cost effective, right? And so, one of the things that I guess, if I'm backing up a second, to understand the environment of emergency medical services is to deconflict a little bit about how it's provided, right? So the fire service, which has been around since the days of insurance companies, right? So like if you were insured by Acme Insurance Company back in the day, you had Acme Fire Department, and then you would put your shingle outside that said, this home is insured by Acme, right? And that if it
Mm.
caught on fire, Acme Fire Department would come out there and go do their thing, right? And then that morphed into, because of the tragic loss of life over fires and conflagrations over, within environments and operational areas. The fire service really became a unified fire way of doing it. The National Fire Protection Agency, NFPA, the National Fire Academy, the way that they do all of their stuff is very in line with one another. It's just stylistic changes in the way they fight fire, which is a science and everything else like that. But the fire service operates from prevention and pre-planning, not a demand staff analysis, right? So you have X amount of people in your city, and there's a formula that says you should have X amount of fire stations staffed by X amount of people, right? And when they want to open up more stations or they want to grow, they go to the citizens and they do bonds, mills, all that kind of stuff to produce that, or it's in the strategic plan of the city and county or state that is providing that service. EMS is usually run by the city or county's, Department of Health Services or local EMS agency, and they do the oversight of health and medical health operations within, which is called the Essential Support Function 8, which is the Med Health branch, and which also ties together with public health, which are two separate horses. Emergency medical services and public health are often get lumped together, but they are two separate entities. EMS is then broken down to pre-hospital care, and so that is delivered by paramedics and EMTs that are out in the field. Now, whether they are employed as private paramedics and EMTs on an American Medical Response ambulance, or a private owned ambulance, or they are a single function paramedic that works for the fire department, but they're not civil servants or civil sworn servants. That's different, or they're full-fledged, firefighter, paramedic, EMT that works on it. So there's different ways of doing it. Private EMS brings the private world of efficiency, and I use that word loosely, is privates, right? If you run a corporation, you're beholden to the stockholders, right? And the people investing into that money, right? So that dollar has to go somewhere, and it's split only so far because we have to do a return on investment. And so it is a fine line of operational efficiency and profit margin, right?
Mm.
And so what happens is that these private ambulances will come into, Don't Walk City and say, I can provide you ambulance service for $2.50, and you're currently paying $10 with your fire department or your county run ambulance service that is out here. And so if the county or the city wants to go out to bid to find out what that looks like, then the privates put together a bid and they say these are the services that we're going to render. And we are going to render these services underneath an exclusive operating agreement, which means that no one else can come into this area and provide these services. We're exclusive operators, which allows us exclusive billing amounts, and then how we're going to staff it. On the flip side, the government agency or entity formulates key performance indicators and or levels of services that are within the acceptable thresholds. And if they're not within those acceptable thresholds, the private ambulance is fined liquidatable damages for non-performance, right? And stuff like so. They're chasing that, right? So you don't have that with the fire service. I mean, there's a standards that the community expects, and so that becomes their key performance indicators or grant language for equipment. So it's a lot to unpack, but that's the world that the private ambulances kind of live in. And if you have really, really amazing contracts that are in partnership and transparent and synergistic with all parties involved, you can get some amazing products out there. If you don't, you can have a catastrophic relationship out there. And so when I go into some of these areas, I look at these contracts and I say, well, this is a catastrophic contract, and it holds no one accountable. And it was usually produced by someone that doesn't understand the operational efficiencies or the operational roles, right? And so they're looking at it from an abacus, which sometimes if you look up from an abacus, you can say, well, that saved me $20, but now I've got a whole other issue on this other side, right? So it's not a game because it's people's lives, but it's a balancing act for sure.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Yeah, no, that's uh, that gives me a whole nother perspective on on these private companies providing, very essential services. So these contracts that these companies get, they get them directly with cities, or do they get them with hospitals and nursing homes? And
Both.
it could be a
Uh,
combination.
It's all the above, right? So if you don't want to run within, so you can have an ambulance company that is predominantly that sole source of operations is taking long-term care patients from their long-term care facility and transporting them to the hospital for dialysis, medical evaluations, and that's all they do. They just move patients back and forth in a basic life support ambulance staffed by two emergency medical technicians, and they sustain patient care. They monitor the patients en route and make sure that no harm is done between transport, and then they return the patient back to long-term care. Another book of business is critical care transport, both ground and air. And those are usually the critical care paramedics, critical care nurses that are augmented by emergency medical technicians or paramedics, both in the air and on the ground. And they take highly, highly acute, big sick patients, multiple IV drips, vents, and they're taking it from one intensive care unit and going to another intensive care unit, or they're going from a specialty cancer hospital to a specialty cancer hospital, and so they have to move them, right? Super delicate patients. I'm a really good medic. I feel I'm really good. I pale in comparison to the clinicians that do critical care transport. I'm about as smart as the rock on the ground in comparison to those guys, because they go through great training, and they're amazing. We like to make fun of them too. We call them flight fairies, but it's just the jabs that we give them because they are very smart. But we like to jab at them every once in a while.
That sounds
So
like how, the Army and the Marines kind of jab at the Air Force.
yes, and there's a lot, there's a healthy respect at the bottom of that level, of the foundation of us all. But yes, when people show up, we used to always say that the helicopter would land and like theme music would come out of the helicopter for them. But I give it's all in love. So there's critical care transport that happens to that. And then there is uh, hospital-based ambulance transport. So the hospital in attempts to reduce operational costs and paying out for subcontracting of private services, they'll start their own hospital-based ambulance, and they'll move people around. You don't really see that in the California area or the Texas area, or in places like that. But in nor'easterns and stuff like that, I've seen a lot more of that. as well. The contract that I'm working in Colorado has a hospital-based ambulance provider, and it's very efficient for that operational area. It doesn't mean it's efficient for all of them. And then there's the 911. There's the emergency. You pick up 911. You call for an ambulance, and they come, and that can either be staffed by fire rescue. It can be third service through the Department of Public Health, or it can be a private-public partnership with a private ambulance company like an AMR, Acadian, or Empress, or something like that that's out there. I do want to make sure that I give credit where credit's due, and that is the men and women that staff the ambulances that are hired by private companies have the same skill set as a paramedic and EMT because of national standards and stuff like that that are out there, or state criteria that is out there. And those men and women are not responsible for the business decisions that happen. They're there for the clinical care. So when you see a private ambulance, those men and women have a lot of the same training that the fire and rescue people do, because there's a national curriculum or a state curriculum that they follow. Where it becomes contentious at times is when you move up into the administration of the program, right? And there's been a lot of traditional infighting between, who's better, the fire department or private EMS. At the end of the day, I don't care whose patch I'm wearing or what color the ambulance is. We're there for the patient and the patient only. And where I think the fire service has done an incredible job at solidifying their stance in this is that most of the men and women that work in the fire service reside out of a consistent firehouse. And so they know their community, they know their patients, they know their high frequency utilizers, they know the one that's going to call you and ask you, hey, can you come change my smoke detector? So there's a collaboration, right? There's a partnership of community there. Private ambulance, because they're for profit, they're moving the ambulances around because of where the demand is. And so they got to fill that demand. So there's not a lot of community engagement at that point in time. So, like I said, it's ebb and flow, it's take and give, it's collaboration, it's, it is what it is. But in all, the nation is suffering an intense challenge in EMS response and sustainability and resiliency, just because it's just a lot easier to run a TikTok and YouTube channel.
I was talking to someone yesterday who's it's funny. He's I didn't know this term before I talked to you, but he's a flight fairy, or was. He's retired now, and runs a kind of a consulting and staffing agency within the EMS and private security world. And he was mentioning that the the demand for these highly trained, highly skilled workers is far, far outpacing the supply. It's a demand supply issue where there's, you know, far more demand for for skilled workers than there are skilled workers or workers that want to actually go and do that job, which is, I found that very interesting.
Well, it comes down to this. I have four beautiful kids, and every once in a while I will call my father and just tell him I'm sorry, because nothing reminds you about parenting than having to walk in your father's footsteps, right? And so as I'm raising kids, I get to say, "Well played, Karma. Well played," right? But one of the conversations I've gotten into with my boys has been, if you learn a trade, you'll never be without a job, right? But someone can turn the light switch off and all of the technology goes away, right? And so how resilient and sustainable are you at providing something? To this day, I still hold a commercial driver's license, and if everything went awry, I can still drive an 18-wheeler truck, right?
And make money and feed your kids.
And make money and feed my kids. I think that we really, as a society, have taken our eyes off of a well balanced society. And I think that that is where you're seeing suffering in the trades of plumbing, electric, welding, medicine,
Truck drivers, commercial truck drivers.
transportation. Those guys are moving commerce. You want to see you want to see a successful attack on our soil. Stop commerce and moving Amazon packages. Right, the world will
Right.
come unglued.
Yeah, no,
I
you
mean, what
got
are we
that
going to do
right.
without? I mean, what are we going to do with all of our oversized boxes with one thing inside of it, right?
Right, right.
So yeah,
You
so
know,
there's a
something
lot.
that,
There's a lot of in the trade.
yeah, no, something that you mentioned earlier that I thought was really interesting is how there's kind of specializations within the EMS world. I was speaking with I was in front of this um, owner of an ambulance service here in Southern California, and he found a very specific niche. He um, specializes in bariatric services. So
Mm,
if there's someone that is, morbidly obese, someone that's too heavy to be properly handled by just about any other ambulance service, that's where he steps in and fills in, the demand for that. I thought that was very interesting, and that he,
yeah.
you know, there's just different avenues, different ways for people to find success in almost any industry. If we're talking about transportation, we got there's guys that only run reefer. There's guys that only
Mm.
run flatbed. There's guys that only run oil and gas. So it's very interesting how people find niches in these industries.
Well, I think that is, I mean, just in in how you said it, like, EMS is it's not just an ambulance. It's a service that has multiple different fingers in it. Like bariatric is considered a high acuity just because of the comorbid factors along with obesity. That the patients are very special and they're very sensitive, right? And the way that we treat bariatric and neonatal intensive care, right? The smallest of the small and the biggest of the big, and and everything between. It's not just a one size fits all. And the fact that you know someone that has found a niche in the bariatric environment, that is a scarce trade. In fact, most of the California contracts that come out for local EMS agencies for bids within counties in California require providers to have a bariatric ability within their contract. So you talk about things. So if you put out an RFP, you're going to say in exchange for being able to charge a $3,000 ambulance bill.
And
uh,
just for our listeners, RFPs, request for proposal. So
Correct, right.
entities like even private companies, or this is mainly in the when a private company tries to contract with a government agency, the government agency will put out a request for proposal, and all interested parties will bid. So just wanted to clear that
Correct.
up.
And one of the and in that request for formal proposal is the response to certain criteria that has to be provided. In the state of California, I think it's every 5 to 10 years they have to go out to RFP unless they fall within a what's called a 201 uh, exclusivity operation, which is another whole bag to unwrap. But anyways, every about 5 to 10 years, each county has to go out to bid, and in those bids, it will say, okay, ambulance A, B, and C, you are going to charge our community $3,000 for an ambulance ride. For that price, the county or the operational area wants to make sure that you have 10 ambulances on every day as your minimum staffing. You have to have the ability to respond to all 911 calls within 8 minutes and 59 seconds. Your paramedics have to be trained with this certain way, and you have to be able to provide mass casualty incident response or bariatric incident response or neonatal critical care transport response. And so that's kind of where all of that stuff gets kind of rinsed out in the wash. And then they submit their proposal, and then they negotiate their costs and stuff like that. However, the fact that your acquaintance that does a bariatric, um, if that is if that were something down in Los Angeles area, he could just focus on that, and he doesn't have to diversify because there are so few people that provide bariatric services.
It seems like he was doing quite well for himself, to be honest. He really found something that is in high demand, and I wasn't really aware until speaking with you that there's not a lot of supply for that. So you have a high demand, low supply. It's going to be a recipe for good business. If we're talking about how this is a business, and a lot of these private entities are, like we touched on, for-profit businesses. You gotta find that niche, and it seems like he found a very, very good niche.
Yeah, he did. And and there are people out there all the time. And the non-emergency transports out there. There's an amazing company out there that I've worked with, and yeah, Caliber out of the Eastern Board, Tennessee area, um, in that area, and also in Florida, they do non-emergency transports, right? So they do gurney van, non-emergency, no lights and sirens, and they shuttle and transport patients from long-term care, acute, or from homes to their medical appointments and back and forth. You could spend all day moving humans and never have to turn on lights and sirens, and be busier, if not as equal, if not busier than a high operational 911 service, right? Because healthcare is a huge book of business in the States right now, right?
You
And
know,
so,
it's funny you mentioned NEMT because I what led me down this rabbit hole, when I was a couple years back when I was first getting into commercial insurance. My early experience and background in insurance was on the personal line side, but I started to focus more on commercial as I got more experience, and I saw that it was just more lucrative, more profitable. And I got uh, a customer that ran really he ran a treatment and wellness center, but as a service within his business, he had vans that would shuttle patients back and forth
mhm,
from their homes to his wellness and treatment center. And that was my first experience with NEMT. And well, actually, no, that was my second one. I had an even smaller operation that they just had like two vans, and they just did NEMT. And but then I started to really pay attention to NEMT.
mhm.
And yeah, no, it is I feel like one of those markets that is poised for a lot of growth, simply because unfortunately the American population is getting older and sicker. Harsh reality.
Mhm.
And the demand is going to be there, and it's just going to increase. Um, that's just the way it is.
The people in our society, as much as I'd like to give us credit that we stop smoking in public, right? And and we understand the words like trans fats and all that. Like we're more cognitive, right? Information is literally at our fingertips right now, right? I mean, bad information, good information, it's information, right? And those that information um is out there. Whether we use the information or not, right, and use it for good is another issue, right? And I can just see that I've seen a lot of abuse um, within the EMS system. I see a ton of abuse within, the fentanyl issues, and our world is always looking to numb some type of pain, and so there's a lot of alcohol and drug abuse that's out there. There's a huge spike in mental health issues right now, psychiatric emergencies that are occurring out there, and so. Yes, we will always have a job for sure. How the system continues to function is really beyond me. That is a level way above me in the capitals of the states and of this nation. Um, but we are at a I can just tell you from a guy that's rose from the ranks all the way up to some high performance systems, the our totality of EMS is at a critical intersection of breaking. And until we start really focusing on not just calling it an essential function or an essential service of EMS is essential, right? It is essential because everyone's going to keep calling 911 to have someone else come and help them out of their worst time of their life. But how do we continue to fund that? How do we continue to make that happen? And honestly, I don't know, because every single jurisdiction, state, local, whatever, they're all different. And so you have to look at it. I mean, if we were London, right? I mean, they've been going for years and years and years, right? They've got one provider, and they treat it like the military. There's one standard of training, one standard of treatment, one standard of providing that. It works for them in a socialized medicine area, but then the takeaways are lack of competition, long lines, access issues, so on and so forth. But I don't know what the answer is, but I do know this for sure, is that no matter what happens on Capitol Hill or in the capitals, someone will fall down, someone will have a stroke, someone will have a heart attack, someone will be shot, and men and women are going to have to go out there and assist in picking up those pieces and putting them back together. And there's just I have not seen the burnout in the record numbers that I've seen in the last 4 years, and that's pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, if we just take a look at what's happened in the last 4 years, you had a worldwide pandemic, and
Yep.
I imagine that that's got to be very taxing on the men and women that provide these services. And it's funny that you mentioned, the European way of doing things, and I bet if someone from London or somewhere where there's socialized medicine were to listen to us in this conversation, they would think that, for-profit ambulance services are probably like the most American thing that you can think of, right? Because it's like, how are you going to make money out of this? Like, this is a service that everybody should have at their fingertips.
Yep.
Um, but that's just America for you. There's just a way for someone to find a profit in almost any service.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. They struggle with different questions and different things. I sit on a group uh, for the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology, and we got to have one of our first meetings since COVID, being able to get back together and talk and share ideas and collaborate. And two of the individuals came from the Home Office of London.
Hmm.
And they were out there, and we were talking and sharing stories. And of course, all great stories occur, afterwards, right? After the conference. And so we so we get out there and we'll start talking. We share so many serious issues together. Uh, what do they say? Across the
Yeah,
pond from
yeah,
one another, right? We share a lot of issues, right? And, assaults on health caregivers, right? And that doesn't matter where you're at. Someone still hits a paramedic or an EMT, and they don't get charged for it, or whatever it is, right? Or lack of supply chain, right? Supply chain issues are huge, right? You get a group of truck drivers that don't feel like they're getting paid enough, and they put their trucks on park. Well, that stops critical supplies from arriving to paramedics and EMTs, right? I mean, they're just, everything is so dependent on one another. It's just this current balancing act that has to occur, and it's. I'm not going to say it's good to hear that we have the same problems, because we still have problems, but it's good to hear that we're not alone, right? We're not doing it. And the nice thing about the progressiveness out there is that we are sharing our complaints and issues. um, Honestly, we're sharing them together. We're trying to figure it out together. The silos are being broken down. I mean, heck, even the fire services of today are realizing maybe 200 years of tradition is not going to get us through the next 200 years, right? We're going to need to start reaching out and looking at different streamlined effects. because our society is getting smarter and more informed, and WebMD can treat me, and I don't need to call 911, right? Or whatever, whatever is out there, right? The makeup and the complexities are a lot different. So it's nice to share those things. But yes, there are things that I'd be like, man, I wish I could ride a motorcycle and be a doctor in London, right? I mean, that would take care of all my traffic delay problems, right? And then they'd be like, wait a second, you do X, Y, you do SWAT tactical medicine out there in the States, and you guys carry guns? Like, oh God, we'd never do that, right? It's like, but they have the same equivalent for, machete attacks. Like, I'd be like, I did not know how I would handle a mass casualty incident over a machete attack, right? So it's different out there. So we get to share and collaborate a lot of our problems together. So, and that's super healthy. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, just the last thought on that is just like, just because there is that socialized medicine aspect of it, it doesn't mean that it's perfect, and
Right.
they've figured everything out. They still have issues, and just like we do, just like you pointed
I
out.
just, and I think to that point, and I don't mean to keep bogarting the time, but I think what I'm not going to say what makes me different than other consultants, but I think what makes me unique is I look at what the patient needs and then work backwards, right?
Mm.
From my approach, and most things can really be handled with kindness, right? And generosity and empathy. And I think we've lost that a lot in many professions. So it's nice that we are reaching out to people that have that similar goal. And I think that we are a great nation that can handle many, many things with just a little bit of kindness and a little bit of empathy and a little bit of grace.
I agree with you 100%. I feel like the human touch, the human factor in all of this, that's really what it all boils down to.
Mm.
And no matter what badge you're wearing, no matter what service you're, what flag you're flying, it doesn't matter. You just got to be a good, decent human being at the end of the day. And I
Right.
think the world would be a better place for that.
Right. I did too. I did too. We're gonna save it all with rainbows and unicorns everywhere, right?
No, I mean there's definitely a place for the big stick to come out. Let's not kid ourselves. Let
Sure.
there's always a place and a time for certain remedies, right? But I feel like to your point, sometimes it's really just that human touch, that empathy that could can make a big difference.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So before we wrap things up here, I do have a 10 o'clock. I gotta jump here soon. What are your plans for the future with with your consulting business and that'll close us out.
Yeah, I think for me the future is I've got a good solid 4 years left in me, and I'm going to give it my all. I hope to partner with people that just have the ability to ask for help or need a little direction, and partner with those that seek to treat patients as they wish to be treated themselves. That's kind of like I used to go out and be like, oh my God, anything and everything. And now I'm like, no, I'm going to focus on those that are going to treat patients as the sole focus. And then we'll work backwards to systems and problems and KPIs and advocacies and budgets, right? We can work backwards from there. I would love once to do a little bit of international work. I
Hmm.
think it'd be neat to share ideas across the pond or just in different areas. But I'm really going to focus on just trying to bring really good quantitative and qualitative trainings and scenario-based trainings and problem solving to the folks that every single day get called to handle people's worst problems, regardless of what's occurring in their life. And that's pretty much my mission statement.
Well put, well put. And there you have it, folks. Here's a conversation with a guy who's seen a lot, and has a wealth of knowledge around the EMS space. Mike, thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us, and I look forward to perhaps having you on the show in the future again. That would be very cool.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.